Jimmy Buffett is often regarded as a once-in-a-generation folk singer whose powerful lyrics have done more to shape our modern society than perhaps any other. From singing about the dangers of Americans' love for fast food in Cheeseburger in Paradise, to his staunch criticism of global unpreparedness for natural disasters in Volcano, Jimmy Buffett has continued to push the boundaries of deep philosophical thought in his classic, laid-back, subtropical themed musical arrangements. But none are perhaps as great as his magnus opus, his 1977 smash hit, Margaritaville. This song gained popularity for its criticism of the United States government for the Iraq War, a war that would not even happen until 25 years after he wrote the song. It's important to stress that in no point in his song is any word or phrase thrown in to capture a vibe. Every word is precisely chosen with incredible depth of meaning that very few modern artists do to this day. In this video, we will break down his lyrics of Margaritaville line by line to show the deeper meaning behind one of the greatest songs ever written. The beauty of Margaritaville is that it's sung from the perspective of 4 different people, each with their own view on the Iraq War. Each of his 3 verses, he has a new omnipresent storyteller, and the classic chorus we all know and love is told from the perspective of Jimmy Buffett himself. Throughout each verse, Buffett gives us clues as to who exactly is telling the story. In just his first 2 lines of the song, he establishes his first omnipresent character as a mere observer to the events that have and will transpire, a silent but ever watchful bystander. This character, as Buffett describes them, is simply nibbling on sponge cake and watching the sun bake, which may seem like an innocent set of lyrics, but it goes much deeper than this. From the lyric, watching the sun bake, the audience gets a clear picture of where we are at, a hot place. In this case, it's the hot, harsh climate of Iraq. Working backwards to the lyric, nibbling on sponge cake, we get a better idea of who this omnipresent character is. By choosing the casual consumption of cake, Buffett is clearly using cake's representation throughout history as a symbol of the out-of-touch elite, possibly referencing the infamous Marie Antoinette's "let them eat cake," to make a clear shot across the bow of who is watching these events unfold. America's swamp of lobbyists, corporations, war profiteers, and political elites, the modern American nobility. In just his 3rd line, Buffett drops perhaps the most controversial line of the entire poem. All of those tourists covered with oil, he says, clearly stating that the soldiers sent into the Middle East are merely just tourists covered in the one thing the US government seeks above all else: oil. Jimmy Buffett chose these lyrics carefully. The word tourist simply means a temporary visitor to a place foreign or domestic seeking pleasure. This lyric just overflows with deliberate double-meaning irony, as there is very little pleasure in battle, and he's also possibly poking fun at the Bush administration's promise of a quick war. But it could also be referencing that these soldiers do tours in Iraq as deployment rotations, and by calling them tourists, he's just simply calling them veterans of the war. Now, the use of the word oil here is incredibly controversial, as American foreign policy has been heavily criticized for its heavy interest in acquiring and protecting their oil interests. But we have to remember that this is told to us from the perspective of America's elites. Had this been meaning to be a mere light-hearted vacation song for a trip to Florida, it's likely Buffett would have chosen something more mainstream, like sunscreen or bronzer, instead of oil. Although there are many beliefs circulating online about why Buffett chose the phrase "covered with oil," It's my personal belief he chose this to state that in the minds of the elite, the only thing that can cover the sins committed in this questionably justifiable war is the baptism of America's coffers into the immense wealth of Iraq's oil fields. The tourists are covered in the liquid black gold that is oil, to signal that America will be successful in this endeavor. With his next lyric, Strummin' My Six String, it is easy for the audience to maybe mistake this as being a characterization of the elites being generally indifferent to the wartime situation, but again, it goes much deeper than this. Strummin', of course, means to casually play this metaphorical guitar, but what is the deeper meaning behind said guitar? The mentioned 6 strings represents the 6 key pillars of power and influence in the United States: the courts, the executives, the lawmakers, the media, the banks, and the military. By characterizing these institutions as strings in an overall guitar, Buffett is showing how all the elites have to do is simply play the combination of strings they so desire, and the guitar will happily play out that tune. From the next lyric, On My Front Porch Swing, we get an idea of the true power of what Buffett believes the elites have. The porch, of course, is in front of a house, and our omnipresent character is sitting ever watchful on the swing, which is logically going to be placed near the front door of this house. But what is this subtly referenced house? Like we will see later in Buffett's masterful poem, this house represents the house often discussed in the American dream, the big house with the white picket fence. In this metaphor, Buffett shows us that the elites of America are sitting on the porch of this said American dream house, dictating who can go in and who can go out, who gets the American dream and who doesn't, a sort of a leader sphinx or cherubim, if you will. The use of the word my implies that the elites exclusively own this position of immense power. Buffett wraps up the perspective of this elitist American character with his final lyric, Smell those shrimp, they're beginning to boil. This lyric serves to represent an acknowledgement of the elites that they understand that the American general public is beginning to become very angry with the upper classes, perhaps at this point about the lies of the pretext of the Iraqi invasion in the form of the so-called weapons of mass destruction that were never found. Shrimp in English can often be used as a derogatory phrase to refer to someone who is weak and small. Jimmy Buffett chooses this language to show us that from the perspective of the elites, the American public themselves are viewed to be weak and small. But the elites know that the proletariat is starting to get very angry. And just like the earlier reference Marie Antoinette in the context of revolutionary France, the elitist character realizes that if he strums his power guitar too hard, in this case to the tune of the Iraqi invasion, tensions between the classes could boil over and the shrimp could overthrow the American nobility. When Buffett then transitions to his uniquely framed chorus, he drops the perspective of the character representing the elites and embraces a character who now wants to begin a discussion about America itself. This is when Buffett himself enters the scene, when he starts the chorus and utters the all too famous "Wasting Away in Margaritaville." It often can be mistaken for a physical location. Margaritaville is not a place, although it may seem like it represents America or even Iraq. This is not what it is at all. Margaritaville is simply a metaphor for a distraction, whether it be social media, alcohol, gambling, or even pastime hobbies. Margaritaville represents how willing the American public is to be blind to what's happening and what it's lost in a cycle that never ends. And what has the American public lost? As Buffett drives us deeper into this cycle of degeneracy, we begin to understand that the lyric searching for the last shaker of salt is also a metaphor for something deeper. A shaker of salt is something that almost all Americans have, whether they be rich or poor. Salt shakers are often used to help better the taste of the harsh realities that fall on our plate, something we can use to improve the things that didn't turn out well or are often difficult to digest. Can't you see what he's truly getting at here? The salt shaker is the American dream, and we as Americans have lost it. But who is to blame for such a tragedy? Well, Buffett works in a jest here at those of us who support authoritarianism or authoritarian regimes. He states this plainly with the lyric, "Some people claim there's a woman to blame." But who is this woman he is jokingly blaming? Well, it's none other than Lady Liberty herself. Those who seek authoritarianism or even alternative means of government would blame democracy or even the free market itself for the destruction of the American dream. But Buffett argues that this is not really the case. Buffett lays this out masterfully through the last lyric of this chorus. But I know it's nobody's fault. This does not seek to say that the destruction of the American dream is nobody's fault, but is meant to set up a story throughout the song of Americans slowly accepting the harsh reality that they, and they alone, are responsible for the lost American dream through things like the Iraq War. We will see this throughout the rest of the poem, as Buffett will slowly begin to change that last lyric in his chorus over time, signaling a willingness to more and more people to accept responsibility for the tragedy that is the Iraq War. In Buffett's middle grouping of lyrics, he takes a brutal shot at the American public and seeks to further prove what he has established in his chorus. Buffett's new set of lyrics are told to us from the perspective of the American public itself, but it's not an objective version of the American public necessarily, but more portrays how Buffett interprets the American public. The lyrics, "I don't know the reason, I've been here all season," is probably the clearest lyrics he lays out in the entirety of the poem. This refers to how it's not exactly clear to the American public why they are in Iraq, and why for such a long period of time. The inability for the Washington establishment to communicate to them if this is a war on terror versus stopping a dictatorship from using nuclear weapons has created confusion. Furthermore, the American public is unsure or doubtful of the connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. Therefore, they are ultimately unsure why America needs to invade Iraq, hence why they don't know the reason that they've been there all season. In his next line, "Nothing to show but this brand new tattoo," Buffett is conveying that to more and more Americans, this war has seen us gain nothing, but has only served to put a permanent stain on the American democracy and the beacon of liberty to the rest of the world that our country represents, which is why he chooses to say tattoo. Tattoos are permanent, but here is where Buffett begins to really drive the knife into the behavior of the American public in real time. In the next lyric, "But it's a real beauty, a Mexican cutie. How it got here, I haven't a clue." This essentially serves to play the role of what the Romans would call bringing out the bread and the circus, a distraction. Margaritaville itself. Let me explain. As America begins catching on to what is really going on, the elites begin to bring out the bread and circus, distracting the American public with things like reduced oil prices from the spoils of war, the early booms of social media where Mexican cuties begin skyrocketing, and take our minds off the war. Buffett shows us in real time that this character, the American public, was on to the truth but get so distracted they lose their pursuit of justice and holding those with power responsible. We no longer have any idea of how this tattoo, this stain on our democracy, got there. We are too focused on what tune the 6-string guitar will play for us next. When Buffett returns to the chorus, he changes that last line to "Hell, it could be my fault," reinforcing that over time, Buffett believes that the American public, looking back, will be more and more willing to accept responsibility for the Iraq War. In the last grouping of lyrics, Buffett wants to show us what this war has truly cost, and he doesn't choose to do this with money or property destruction from the war, but with the actual people fighting this conflict on the ground. His last set of lyrics are told to us from the character and the perspective of a soldier. With the lyrics, I blew out my flip-flop, stepped on a pop-top, cut my heel and had to cruise on back home. Buffett is showing a first-hand account of a wounded soldier, possibly one injured by a car bomb or even a landmine. He's also showing to us that a bitter, confusing guerrilla warfare has now settled in at our prolonged occupation of Iraq. This wounded soldier is sent home, but this is only the beginning of his troubles. Unfortunately, the PTSD of the wartime experience in Iraq has turned this soldier from the battle to the bottle. In his next set of lyrics, he states, "But there's booze in the blender, and soon it will render that frozen concoction that helps me hang on." This is a devastating scene that Buffett gives us insight into. The only thing that keeps this wounded warrior going is distracting himself so much from the realities of his experience that he turns to alcohol. With that, Buffett returns to his chorus, where he curiously repeats what he is saying twice, as to further emphasize all of his points. He once again changes the last lyric of the chorus to "But I know it's my own damn fault." Buffett leaves us with this last lyric as he wishes the American public would, and one day hopefully, accept the fact that the loss of the American dream is through things like the Iraq War, and only can be blamed on no one but themselves through the tolerance of the system. America created all of its own institutions, and with no outside invader coming in to dismantle these institutions, the people have no one to blame but themselves. Or in other words, if Americans cannot escape from distractions like social media, then they never truly will regain their lost American dream. Thank you for watching, and subscribe to this channel for more video essays. I'm Derogatory, and I'll see you next time.